Wow, can you believe it? It has officially been 1 year since we launched the Experience Miracles podcast, and we couldn't have done it without you, our incredible listeners, parents, and community. Whether you've been here since episode number 1 or just found us recently, thank you for every download, every share, comment, and story you have sent our way. You're the reason we keep showing up week after week, twice a week actually, and the reason why more families are getting the hope, answers, and drug-free help they've been searching for. To celebrate this milestone and show our gratitude, we're doing something extra special. We want to give you multiple chances to win some amazing prizes and gifts. All you got to do is tap the link in the show notes to find out exactly how to enter. It's crazy quick and easy, we promise. And on January 24th, we'll be choosing the winners to receive the prizes like Amazon gift cards, organic beauty bundles, you know me and my skincare routine that I don't have, and custom Stanleys, along with some Experience Miracles merch. Thanks again for being part of this incredible journey alongside me and tens of thousands of other parents and families. Here's to another year of expecting and experiencing miracles.
There's nothing funny or cute about a child that snores. Nothing. If a child is noisy breathing, if you can hear them breathe, if you can see them swallow and you can hear them breathe, those are subtle signs that this child's body is dysfunctional neurologically, structurally, and they cannot function.
Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. All right, parents, you have asked many times over, many of you, for this episode where we dig deep into the airway. We dig deep into with the leading professional for pediatrics, for nervous system regulation, for the airway, the dental conversation. We have Dr. Bahar Esmaili on this one. And I got to tell you, this is a conversation where you, even if you're low energy right now, even if you're a little tired and a little dragging right now, you don't even need coffee today. Bahar and I will be that source of energy for you. This conversation starts fast, stays fast, and this conversation is so transformational for your family because Bahar is a true trailblazer in pediatric dental health. This is a conversation you'll see that I have been wanting to learn more about myself for many, many years. I haven't met really any experts who have not just I shouldn't say just the passion, because Bahar's passion is literally coming out of her eyeballs, and you'll hear that, feel that during this episode. But you can have a lot of passion and you can have a lot of excitement all around a topic, but do you have a lot of experience? And as it seems to be, again and again, it definitely is. Not everybody has to fit this criteria, but it's one thing we're always looking for is so many of the people we bring onto this platform and we interview and we have teach alongside me for you and your family. They're not just professionals. Like, I could read Dr. Bahar's bio and I could tell you all about the cool dental school and the certifications she's gone to, but Bahar's a mom. And what she's going to start with first is her daughter's story. That is her spark, her catalyst, and the path God laid before her to know what she now knows and do what she now does. And I got to tell you, you got to know what she knows. And you got to learn the interventions and the things that are out there for this very important part of our kids' health and well-being. Something you'll learn as we go along, and I'm interviewing her. I have questions for her. You can tell I very much enter learning mode myself because, again, I hadn't come across an expert even close to the level of Dr. Bahar and the Vivos group until meeting her, until God put our paths together. And this is the first time here on the podcast and the platform that you're hearing from Dr. Bahar, but I promise you this, not the last time that we will bring this conversation to you. We're thinking about doing a webinar. We're thinking about doing summits. We're thinking about making sure that you know that stressed out, exhausted nervous systems are the biggest deal in healthcare, and that the airway and what you maybe thought about dental care, jaw structure, orthodontic work, TMJ, you name it, you got to learn what this incredible woman knows and what we talk about. Get ready for an incredible conversation with this absolute God-directed, God-infused powerhouse of knowledge, passion, and expertise, Dr. Bahar Esmaili. All right, everyone, as you just heard in the introduction, you are in for a mind-blowing and just honestly such an expansive, intelligent, exciting conversation here with Dr. Bahar, because this is something that maybe we know our audience. You guys have been up late at night studying what's really actually going on with your kiddos. And so sometimes those open doors to these deeper dive investigations into stuff you've heard about before, say chiropractic or dentistry or, alignment and these things. But then you go deeper and you're like, son of a gun, there's so much more to this. Well, when you hear from Dr. Bahar, that is exactly what it is. So that's kind of your story, right, Doc, where you were it's very similar to me. You were in a standard path with dentistry, right? And that's not to say that that's not awesome and helpful and such a needed thing. Where did this spark? Tell us your story. What created this understanding and this transformation and dare I say, awesomely obsession with what you're going to teach us today?
Totally. Thank you so much, Tony, for giving me a chance to share my story here with your audience, because I'm going to talk first as a mom. That's really what got me into all of this. And then as a dentist and a professional, because I went through mainstream. I grew up in Iran, came to the United States when I was 20 years old. And growing up in Middle East in the midst of war, all I wanted to do was helping people and be a doctor, because I knew that was the answer to getting humans out of suffering. And when I came to the United States to join my family, I wanted to put that dream into motion. So I chose dentistry of all things. First, I want to be a pharmacist, but then that just got redirected to dentistry. And 2009, I graduated from dental school with that same hope that now I'm going to do what I wanted to do, just go out there and save the world. But the first thing out of dental school, like out of the training I had, the first question I always asked was, everything that they teach me here is how to fix a problem of the last generation dentist. And they didn't tell me how to prevent it from coming to happen in the first place. That question was bugging me. But unfortunately, when you come out of mainstream training, the one thing you have on your shoulders is a student loan. So you don't afford to ask those questions, because any question that has to be outside of your training, you don't get paid to do them. So you have to do the things you get paid to do, which is fixing one tooth at a time. And 2017, I started to ask the question of how the mouth really works. How did the two arches come together? And I wanted to be a TMJ specialist. But shortly before that, my daughter, my Melody, was born in 2013. So I wanted to stay home, be a mom, didn't want to go to work, just wanted my kids to have all the best that they could get from me and then raise them properly. The one thing this kid did not have is she didn't have good quality sleep. She always woke up several times throughout the night. And she's 3 years old. She should be going through the night with night terrors. And every time she would get sick, she would be sick for a good 2 months. And the pediatrician, every year I would take her to the pediatrician and check them. There's nothing wrong with this child, but it's just, she's never well. And I became a personal trainer right out of dental school when I stopped practicing, stayed home with the children. I just didn't have nothing else to do with my time. So I decided to be a personal trainer. So I knew a lot about the body, how the pelvis works, how the ankle works, because you don't get those combinations normally. So I started noticing that certain patterns in the mouth are certain patterns in the pelvis, and it's all across. They have a pelvis forward pelvis rotation or a lumbar extension. They usually have class 2 malocclusion almost all of the time. If they have a posterior tilt, they have a class 3 malocclusion. And I knew that there's a connection between them. These are the things I saw, and then I filed them away. But then I go back to doing what I do as a dentist. Then I started noticing my own child that has a lumbar extension in a gymnastic floor. And she grinded her teeth down to a knob. At age 5, she barely has any tooth left. And I'm concerned because she's nasal, she's sick, she snores, she doesn't sleep. And now preschool is calling me every day that my child has ADHD and they should be on medications. And I kept telling them that she doesn't sleep. And so I went to an ENT when she was 3. And I said, I need a sleep test. This kid is nasal. I don't know what's going on. And they said, just go home and put a Flonase in her nose and she'll be fine. Oof. Because at age 3, what are they going to do? Do a sleep test. That's expensive. It's not easy. And the treatment of choice is what? Just take out her tonsils.
Yeah, I
She's
was going to
only
say,
3.
it wasn't going to go down the road you would have wanted to go down anyway. So
We're like, okay, we know exactly what's going to happen if we do a sleep test, and I'm not going to do this. Come back when she's 8 years old. And at 5, like her ADHD is so bad, Tony, that the school is pushing me to put her on meds, and I'm not doing that. So I saw an orthodontist at that point, and I was concerned about her mouth that was just all going to one side and cross-eyed. And nope, come back when she's 8, because what am I going to do? Put wires on baby teeth? So 6 years old, she is about to go to kindergarten, and then nothing is getting better. So I demanded a home sleep test at that time. And her apnea hypopnea numbers, now for those who are listening and don't understand what that is, for every disease, there's a metric we use to see the severity. Apnea hypopnea index is the number that's used to measure the severity of sleep apnea, which is the times per night, average times that you stop breathing or your flow becomes limited because of an obstruction. And if it lasts 10 seconds, it's considered an event. On average, she had 10 episodes per hour. To give you a reference, 1 event per hour for anyone under 18 is devastating. So she had 10. So the pulmonologist who ordered the sleep test agreed that she's severe. We got to send her to an ENT to amputate her body organs that are doing their job.
And no other way to really say it other than that.
No way to say it, amputation. Right? And by the way, while we're at that, we're having this discussion. One of the most renowned journals in medicine, the Journal of the New England Journal of Medicine, actually did a retrospective study several years. And they said for a couple hundred years, we've been removing adenoids and tonsils, and it didn't seem to have improved anything. So if you do watchful waiting or remove them, they're the same. And that's still not going anywhere. So we follow
very similar to the journal articles that have come out about don't use antibiotics and watch away. The articles have been around for literally now since the 1980s, but doesn't mean anybody follows the articles. They follow the ones that follow what they want to do, but they don't follow the ones that don't fit the system.
Tony, I hate to say this, but unless there's some litigations and there's some enforcement behind, nobody follows it until they come and knock on my door and they say, until you do it, you're going to have a liability. Nobody's going to follow through. So at that point, I've seen 4 board certified specialists, and her teeth are now completely gone from grinding. And we chopped off the tonsils and adenoids, which was horrendous. The whole lab sleep test was pretty much a traumatic experience.
Yes, ma'am.
But on top of that, removing tonsils and adenoids. The snoring somewhat improved, but she's still not sleeping well. She's still not waking up rested, and she's still ADHD. Now, I have done everything that the standard of care, even though it says maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, it didn't help for my child. So even if it is somewhat percentage successful for some other child, it was 100% failure.
Or even for maybe a short blip, right? You get 30 days or 3 months where the nervous system, sometimes we see that when kids have their, these body parts amputated. It's like a very short-lived timeout where the nervous system will kind of like catch its breath, but it doesn't ever, even when it's that never lasts.
Never lasts. And that's my only issue, is that mainstream, which is what I learned and I followed, it only gives us a certain amount of answers because the answers are given in the diagnostics that are so isolated. And to me, the treatment should be specialized, but diagnostics should be a global aspect because body is not compartmentalized when it works. Why are we diagnosing it in compartments? So what I'm really hoping that everyone who's listening and that right out of the gate I hatch them is one question that every year I took her to a pediatrician. I'm a doctor trained by the system myself. 5 board certified specialists, 2 orthodontists, 2 ENT, and a double board certified pulmonologist and a pediatric sleep. Not one asked the one important question about this child. You know what that is? Bring on the drum rolls. How does she breathe?
Yeah.
Nobody was interested. Nobody was interested to know. How does she breathe? Is she breathing properly? And why is she not breathing properly? Because if that question was answered, I would have not lost the first 7 years of her life, which was probably the most important for her growth, from her facial development to her brain development, which you're the expert, and left-right brain development, the brain getting what it needs. And I'm picking up the slacks right now. I'm basically still picking up the damage that was done the first 7 years that I lost the time. And it wasn't like I was sitting home and filing my nails. I was looking for answers.
You were going everywhere. Yeah.
Nobody giving it to me. Nobody was giving it to me.
Yeah.
So at that time, I started reading this book because I'm in private practice and I want to be a TMJ specialist. So I started to advance my own training to learn more about TMJ. And everywhere I'm turning, there's sleep and breathing attached to it. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So what we know to be a jaw joint issue is not just an isolated problem. It has something to do with the breathing and body function. Then my thinking brain kind of turned on, the light bulb turned on to start taking courses about sleep. 2017, that's the first time I looked into sleep and wanted to advance my training and practice to it.
Are those courses, would you say those courses were still coming from the dental arena, or did you start to step outside now?
Yeah, it was still dental. And I remember very vividly, the speaker showed a picture of a child with a grinded teeth and a tonsil enlargement and said, "This is the apnea in children." And I'm thinking, right there, that's my child. So I know she's not breathing, but what do? There is, like I said, solution for children and pediatric is just so basic, so minimal. But I'm glad to tell you, that has changed already. The Vivos, the company that I work with, has changed that once and for all. What I didn't have access to 6 years ago, now it's an option.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I started now looking into Airway because there's a ton of relationship between airway, breathing, and sleep. So now I need to learn more. And 2018 and 2019, this is pretty much where my focus in dentistry, the question you asked, how did you come out of that? Yeah. I started the question, if I didn't have the answer to help the one important person in my life, which is my child, who else have I messed up? What else have I done wrong? What else did they not teach me? You know, that you go from that state of beautiful, blissful state of unconscious incompetence. Like I was there. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was perfectly fine. Now I know what I don't know, and I am all diagnosis, all question, and I don't know how to treat it. Now that's not a good place to be for a mom, for a doctor. And my practice across the beautiful city in Boulder, Colorado, was across the street from university. So I was seeing a lot of younger students come into the campus. And Tony, they all had the same thing. They don't have cavities and gum disease anymore. They all have beautiful straight teeth. You know what they had? Clenching. They just broke the jaw joint, headaches, Adderall, ADHD.
Anxiety, ADHD.
And anxiety. Exactly. I'm like, this is an epidemic. Like all of them are on recreationals, right? You know what I'm talking about. You're like,
is that why they chose to go to Boulder and matriculate at Colorado? Because they could have easier access to stress relief. Okay, that's funny, honestly, but true.
I've asked that question and I'm thinking maybe. I mean, it's not like the other ones are not taking, the marijuana, but
I don't think it's probably relegated to Colorado University. Yeah, totally right.
Exactly, and I'm like, okay, party city, one thing, but they're all having anxiety and ADHD, and they all have jaw joint problem, all have headaches. What's going on with this generation? So combined with all of that, 2019 became the year. This has come at the top of the 10-year mark. And I was not in it anymore in mainstream, but I had to still pay the bills. You know how it is. You still have to You still have to pay the payroll. So again, we go from one debt, I paid my student loans, and now I have practice debt, right? You don't get to ask questions when you have to do what you can get paid to do, right? So 2020 happened, and
Can I pause there? Can I pause you there, my friend? I love you so much. This is so impactful. Even this granular detail of your story is something I want parents to hear about providers, because parents, we actually end up walking the exact same path you do in our provider journey, where it's an unknowing force that says you have to do it. The system is the system is built for us to have to be in line and follow the system, because there's just not only the training, but the debt that comes with it. So I know a lot of parents are very, very frustrated with their provider. Like, why can't you just think out of the box with me? Why can't you, step out of the mold and the cookie cutter? And I want to tell you the truth. The majority, I believe this to be true. I'm always a glasses very half full kind of guy. The majority do, and the majority can't, because their family and their bills and their debt and everything else. Honestly, I'll tell you the truth. I'll be done with it from here. It's not a place anybody would want to be. If you ever kind of get this sense that the provider, well, let's call them traditional for now, the ones that are still just in the system, whether dental, chiropractic, medical, fill in the blank, all the same. If you feel like, geez, they seem a little miserable to be true, they are. you know, because the worst place to be, there's some bliss on the front end of, I don't even know, you know, like there's a little bit of that other saying, ignorance is bliss, right? And that's what you're saying, Dr. Bahar, is like, at first you didn't even know what you didn't know. The middle place in your journey, and I can't wait to get to the third place because that's where you exist now. The middle place in your journey is where you knew what was wrong, but you didn't know how to fix it. That's where a lot of parents, you're listening right now and you're like, I'm there. And the whole purpose of this podcast, the whole purpose of Vivos, the whole purpose of Dr. Bahar's content is to get you to step 3 here, which is like, okay, I now know the actual root cause and the problem. Now I also need to know and get to know what to do. So sorry, I just wanted to pull that out because I think a lot of parents are like, why is my provider so stuck in the mud? And sometimes there's this behind that.
No, and you nailed it, because you know how many people have the audacity I had to go door to door to door, and I still didn't lose faith that there's help for my daughter. I got to help my child. When I was getting to was 2019, I started to going into outside of the mainstream and outside of training to find the answers. And I read this book. I was introduced to the book in one of the courses I took from, it was a dental group called Close Your Mouth by Patrick McEwen. And he is not a doctor. He was trained as a breathing specialist by Dr. Buteyko about the importance of nasal breathing. And Dr. Buteyko actually proved to the Soviet Union, we're talking like 100 years ago, that we can treat asthma. We can cure asthma if we get people to breathe properly. Yeah. Their bodies are turning and twisting. Scoliosis has been related to a lot of dysfunctional breathing. And he said we can actually get people improve their asthma, completely be asthma free if they breathe properly. So he wrote this book about how to close your mouth. And I read that book and I'm thinking, this information is not new, but why did I not know that? So I told the pulmonologist, the sleep physician who ordered my daughter's tonsils removed. I said, look, we're not doing another follow-up sleep test because it was horrendous and there's nothing else we could do for follow-up. But I read this book and I held the book and I said, I read this book and it talks about taping her mouth to get her to nasal breathe. I think the problem is her breathing. That's why her tonsils were enlarged from what I'm learning. I still didn't know how to treat her mouth. She's still grinding her teeth, but I think that might be a solution. And then later on, when I retrieved her notes for records, it said somewhere in the parentheses that Mom said, I'm going to start taping her mouth, end quote. Like, I'm not taking ownership of that. That crazy did not come from me. And to me, that is really we're talking about root cause. Yeah. For us to think outside the box, it's almost like any information comes at me, I have to look at it. Is it clinically tried? Has it been to placebo effect? Like, to me, every other study they throw at me that would have helped my daughter is 100% failure because it didn't help my child.
Yes, ma'am. Gosh, that's so beautiful.
Not know what I needed, right? So 2020, early 2020, I'm fast forwarding. This is my 10-year mark as a dentist, as a mainstream dentist. Now I'm fully consciously incompetent. I know what I don't know, and I don't want to do what I know what to do. I stopped touching the drill as much as I could. I tell people about their breathing, about their sleep. I'm sending them to sleep physician, which they come back to me. Their AHI is not bad enough to do anything. And I'm like, they're not breathing. They're just like my daughter. So 2020, the best thing in my career happened, not for the world, the pandemic. You know what happened? The world stopped. So I got the 2 months that I never got out of dental school, the 2 months that I don't have to pay bills, I don't have to pay the payroll, and I can think. That was the 2 months. And then it was just God moment in my life where I decided, what do I want to be when I grow up? This is 10 years. What is going to be me 30 years from now? If I were to switch gears right now, make a U-turn, is this road taking me home or is this road taking me to Kansas? That's not home. You know how you get to Denver International Airport? Some people think if you continue, you might end up in Kansas. I don't know why they do that. Like Denver International is so outside the city. Might as well be near Kansas, right? Like, is this going to take me home or do I need to make a U-turn right now? It will be a while back, but we'll find out where I need to go. And I wrote a mission statement. And in that mission statement, it was nowhere on it that I want to be a dentist anymore. It was clear what I'm seeing is no longer serving me, and I need to figure out how to do my job right. I didn't believe in mainstream anymore. It didn't answer the questions of how the body works, and I need to find out why. So I decided to sell my practice the best time anyone can do it during the pandemic. I couldn't even bring people to see the practice. I'm not going back to this after the closure. They couldn't even come to see the practice. The broker had to bring them in one at a time, and sold my practice during the pandemic. Tony, I was that serious. Wow. Either I
That's
find the
beautiful.
answers or I will completely shift in careers because I am out of love with dentistry the way I did it. Obviously, I'm causing more harm than good. And like I
Yep.
said, I'm not saying this is for everyone. I'm not wronging anyone for doing it because it was more than clear to me. I'm putting straight teeth on crooked bodies that are not
Yep.
functioning.
Yeah, and you needed the freedom to go find what the solution was,
Yep.
right? You needed to
There
be
was
able to
a
say,
very
okay,
expensive cost to that
I know
freedom.
it. Yeah, you knew where you weren't going to find it, so you needed
Yep.
to take the significant step in a different direction. So how did you find Vivos? How did
Well,
Vivos find you?
selling
How
my
did you find
practice
it?
was my entrance and my intro to get to Vivos. And I picked up a high tap to get to that door. The first time that, the folks that bought my practice, one of them was a Vivos doctor. And he said, "Oh, will you probably sell your practice?" When I said, "Because I just don't want to be a general dentist anymore. I want to go and I want to specialize in airway and learn to do airway." And he says, "Oh yeah, you go talk to this Vivos people. That's what you need." And I'm like, "Oh shit, this is a lot of foo-foo stuff."
Yeah,
And the first time I listened to lectures at Vivos, and it was pandemic, so we couldn't do this in person. Tony, I was in tears.
yeah,
Like everything I heard is
yeah,
exactly what I was looking for the last 5 years to answer the question about my child. And you know what's really, really heartbreaking? The answer was not difficult. The treatment that I needed wasn't difficult. It wasn't even specialized at that point for my daughter. All she needed was to get their tongue to the roof of her mouth and to
yep,
breathe and to get
yep,
her body to calm down.
yes, yes,
And that
yeah,
opened the door to all the other things that fell apart when she wasn't breathing properly. And within 3 months of getting her into the proper treatment, training her tongue, getting her to breathe properly, I have a brand new child,
yeah,
brand new child. And that goes to show you where melody came from. There's hundreds. And since then, I joined Vivos because obviously I no longer have a practice to be responsible for. And I started working at one of their main clinics. And I got to see a lot of patients come through. And since then, I've advanced all of my trainings into things that I should have known. And I needed to know as a dentist, how does a chiropractor fit into the treating the mouth? I jokingly say, and maybe I shared this with you,
yeah,
as I was interacting with a lot of our new doctors who are onboarding internationally, I explained to them how complex the body is. How I got to understand the complexity of it is not from our dental community.
yeah,
It was me sitting for 3 years in courses with chiropractors, three
yeah.
different flavors of chiropractors, physical therapists. I
Yeah,
know.
that's a perfect way to say it. Flavors of chiropractors.
But
Yeah, for
I
sure.
have my favorite ones are SOTs, correctors, my favorite.
Yep.
They're the best for the dentist partners. And then upper cervicals and nuca, they have a good place for them. But I also love what you guys are doing and a lot of folks that are really focused on the nervous system because
Yeah.
I honestly, what I learned, Tony, is we have 32 teeth in the mouth,
Yeah.
ideally, without extractions, and we have 33 vertebrae. They're the
Yeah.
exact same thing. The
Yeah.
teeth in the mouth are equivalent vertebrae. So I love chiropractors.
Yeah.
And
No, and
I think
that's where we're going to go deep is okay. So we know that the airway, we know that breathing dysfunction, like because that's what I love about how you teach. You can do both at the same time. And that's what we have both discovered is that this is both like with your daughter's story. It is, and sitting in those classes is so exactly that. Holy cow. This is what parents say to us all the time. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. How come nobody told me that before? Because it's very simple. I find myself, I write articles. I love making educational content for parents. I love writing. I actually love writing more than anything else because you can a little bit take your time with it, right? And you can really, make sure you're being clear on a point. And anyway, sometimes on video and podcasts, especially if you're a raging bull like me and you, sometimes you get really, really going, right? So anyways, I find myself writing all the time. The problem is hidden in plain sight. And this nervous system dysfunction, this breathing dysfunction, this subluxation conversation, which is really, like you just said, all the same conversation. It was right there the whole time because the teenagers you talked about out in Boulder that are full of tension in their jaw, full of tension in their neck, full of tension in their skull, full of tension in their nervous system. They can't sleep. They can't calm their emotions. They can't focus. It's all the same neurobiomechanics. That is a teenager with anxiety. That is a 5-year-old with ADHD. And that is actually the same neurobiomechanics as a colicky baby. That's it's all the same. Kids never grow out of it. They always grow into these other things as well. And so I had the same path. When I found this out, I was like, it's right there. It's stressful pregnancies. It's birth trauma that then distorts the skull and the cranium and the upper cervical. And now when you distort function of the nervous system, everything
Tony,
is...
take a moment here. You just hit a point that I really want to bring home right now. And you're thinking, why is a dentist sitting here with a chiropractor?
Yeah.
And I hope that there's a dentist out there listening to this because here's why. Which one did we have first? When we were born, do we have teeth or we have skull? We don't have teeth at birth. People, this is a really important information. And this is what I was trying to bring it home is there's 17 specialists I can list right now that need to set up the stage for the mouth to work properly before the teeth are in the equation. 17 at the minimum. That means if that child has anything wrong with their body at the minute of conception, during formation, during the birth, as they go through the birth canal, if they were born vaginally, if they were cesarean, whole another story.
Yep.
What kind of bacteria they become a host of, how their nervous system picks the bacteria in their mouth, how their tongue gets posture, how the fascia is distorted. And when the teeth come in, Tony, I call teeth children in the equation.
Perfect.
Teeth are kids, right? They come into the family. They're not in there first. Mom and dad, upper jaw and lower jaw, bring the teeth together, okay? So the teeth are children. They do not decide their fate. They come into the position the body predetermined. The environment was already set. If they have a distorted temporal bone and a cranium and a neck and an occiput, their jaws are off by different zip codes, as I say. They're in a class 2 position to begin with. Guess where the teeth are going to come in? In a class 2 position, which is the most common malocclusion we see. If they're having a temporal bone here off and a temporal bone off here, their mouth is going to be crossbite, and now they're going to walk, and their walk is going to be kittywampus too. So they walk that way. They read that way.
Even before when we go back to how God designed us, which you can see this brilliance, and that's because it's simple, it's sequential, and then it's absolutely complex and advanced at the same time. And that's why we want to always bring this podcast to you guys as listeners, because that's where God has sent some of us folks here, the Dr. Tonys and the Dr. Bahars of the world, who can see it and explain it both simply and then also, as I like to say, dance with the neuro nerds, right? And make it complex. And when we study neurology and embryology, we know that the first thing that actually develops is what's called the notochord in the neural tube. So there's neurological tissue development first. There's actually soft tissue and CNS, ANS tissue that needs to develop, and then the skull and the vertebrae and the spine develop around it. So literally just through the hierarchy and the sequential development, you can see that the nervous system is boss, then the structure, so skull and spine, because also those temporal bones, those parietal bones, those pallid bones, they're actually doing what the brain is built bottom up, back forward. So the upper cervical spine and the neurospinal system, that's why you love SOT and you love those other flavors, because we know that actually in order to ever keep the cranium and because symmetry is life. The nervous system needs symmetry, breathing needs symmetry, the brain needs symmetry, our emotions need symmetry. And so in order to get everything aligned, you actually have to work from the neck up and then back forward. And that's actually, I'm probably actually, speaking of being forward, I'm probably 2 chapters ahead of where our conversation really should go in order here, Dr. Bahar, because what I find now is,
back home, Tony, because
it's us, right? We knew we were going to do that, but you've got these providers now, and this is something I wanted to talk about. And again, maybe I'm cart before the horse, but even now when we wake up to the reality of myofunction and airway function and its role on the nervous system and sensory and midline, what I find is sometimes people are in providers, and then obviously they're going to lead parents down this path. You can take too much of a good thing. Sometimes I'm finding providers are trying to fix C before they've taken care of A and B, right? And even if you're not using palate expanders and wires and forcing it, what I find is a lot of cranial and a lot of myofunctional therapists, what they're doing is they're working on the palate and the airway and the parietals. They're working on that system without chiropractic. And if you work on it without chiropractic, taking care of the upper cervical and what we'll call the bottom and the back in kind of this anatomical context, you can make change happen because those structures are pliable, especially earlier, but you can't get change to stick. Right. And so again, I'm a couple of chapters ahead because I kind of jumped right into the neurobiomechanics of this.
This is where beautiful, Tony, because as you mentioned, the hierarchy of our development was what comes first and what comes next. And teeth are the last piece of the equation, but they're the most important ones. Well, as bipedal species that have to stand up, what 3 things make us humans? We stand on 2 feet.
That is.
We have a big brain. and we speak. We are able to formulate our thoughts. First of all, we can actually have coherent thoughts. Then we can actually speak those thoughts into existence. Why? Because our pharynx drops below the palate. Other mammals and species don't have that capability. We do all of those on 2 feet, which means our airway, which is basically a hollow space within our body, confined within our mouth, neck, our cranium, and our pelvis. That's a hollow space.
Yeah.
It's basically neurologically controlled with all those structures and needs to maintain that patency in all positions when we stand upright. These are a lot of neurological stuff that need a lot of stimulations, sensory-wise, that unfortunately is missing from the environment. Let's talk about the womb. The womb is where the problem begins. It's not birth onwards. That's where we barely catch it, Tony, because we haven't experimented. We're not going to experiment on pregnant women to know this, but I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago. It's talking about the neural tube you spoke about, how the migration of cells that kind of form the craniofacials very early on during pregnancy. Yeah. There are genes that need to be turned on. One in particular, I'm getting nerdy. It's called SHH. What stands for? Don't ask me. That gene, for it to be turned on, it requires optimal environment. So if mom has preeclampsia, mom has a sleep apnea, mom has diabetes and oxidative stress, it will interfere with turning that gene on that allows
because she stays. Yes. Because she stays in sympathetic dominant, a fight or flight protective response. Because growth is healing. So we think of growth as kids. We think of growth and development. Everybody needs to be in growth to be healthy. And mom's nervous system, actually designed by God, is supposed to shift into a more parasympathetic, extra, because mom's nervous system and physiological system needs to be really derived into this growth. You don't want to call it mentality. It's a neuro setting. And because mom's growing the baby, that's the beautiful, amazing thing about it. So what we're doing is we're stressing and disempowering and scaring the heck out of moms. And we're leaving them in such a state of sympathetic fight or flight that is now the neurological status with which the baby is developing. So my undergrad degree was in molecular biology and genetics. So what I know, I am very, very familiar with the study you're talking about. And so genes do not just have this wildly programming that like this gene just knows on day 173 or at 23 years of life, it's supposed to turn on or turn off. The environment, that's epigenetics, dictates which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. So that perinatal, that fetal environment, now mom's nervous system, and that has to do with her breathing. That has to do with her sleep. That has to do with her nervous system function. Is really dictating the baby. So we can really prevent so much of the storm by taking care of females, by taking, I would go all the way up to preconception, right? And preparing them.
I would say girls during their,
yes, ma'am,
early ages, the healthier moms are growing up, the better chance we have for them growing healthier babies. So can we really change the pre-birth? Of course we can. If we can have moms, again, mom's womb is a hostile environment. The amount of exposure to toxicity from the environment alone, mental stress, chemical stress, and yes, orthopedic stress as well. Distortions in mom's spine and pelvis is going to mold that child's skull. So their faces are not developing properly from the get-go. So they're born that way. And then the birth trauma added over the way they make it to the world. And also the reflexes that are integrated or not integrated. It's just another can of worm, right?
Yeah, those follow sympathetic dominance too. Reflexes, they will integrate when kids start getting adjusted with neurologically focused chiropractic. We talked a lot about that. You can get so much of this back online, including, oh my gosh, I got to sneak this in here live on the podcast. Very soon, we're all getting together with our best buddy, Dr. Jay Coleman. And because he's an SOT cranial specialist, also a PX doctor, no one uses the word patency like you just did on this podcast as much as Dr. Jake. I don't think I've heard it since Dr. Jake. So when you two get together, I think you should put the Google Calendar invite to say patency discussion, okay? Because you two will literally. So I'm going to come back to the word patency and have you explain in parent speak. But I want to swim back upstream for a second because I know how parents are wired, and we built this podcast for you parents to make sure that we don't ever.
Because you want me to, I want to take the opportunity here, and this is the way I like to describe this.
Perfect.
Imagine a piece of paper. Okay, this piece of paper, one human cell. One human cell has not grown to be a fully developed human, which basically divides up in the middle, and one end becomes our head and the other one becomes our tail. environmental signals, anything in the womb, and all of those genes are like the forces that are folding this up to turn it into an origami. Imagine that. But in fact, those forces and those signals are so wrong that instead of turning this into an origami, it's going to turn it into this.
Yep.
Okay? And this is just at birth, going through birth trauma, and then feeding from the bottle instead of the breastfeeding, or inability to breastfeed because of tongue tie.
Yep.
And then the child has to put their feet on the ground with the reflexes that hasn't turned off, and now they got to walk. And this is what I see when they're 6 years old, with like my daughter grinding their teeth down with a crossbite and crowded teeth. Okay, this is this clumbered punch, right?
Yeah.
All that fascia that's holding this face in a distorted position, that posture in a distorted position. And this is all the stressors that are responsible for this chemical, mental, you call it toxins.
Perfect storm.
Trauma, perfect storm. This is what I see now. They come to me for crooked teeth, Tony. This is what I can tell you.
And you know, their digestion is knotted in. They're little neurogenic. People think that constipation is nutrition only. Constipation, 90% of it is neurogenic. Immune system dysregulation. Your daughter was sick all the time because you can't clear congestion. The body literally becomes mangled into this subluxated dysautonomic state, and it shows up physically. It shows up digestively. It shows up immunologically. It shows up in the mouth. It shows up in their emotions. It shows up in their sleep. So here's what I want to laser in on the airway. I want to laser in on breathing, dysfunctional breathing. That is, like, if we give it a catch-all term, right? We're at a really good term with that. And dysfunctional breathing, we know in our work is connected to a dysfunctional nervous system, right? And it's like chicken or the egg, both. Okay, we got to fix both. That's what we're talking about. That's just to get to that part. So how does a parent find out? So before we know that we need to fix it, my Iowa farmer term for this, before we need a solution, how does a parent find out? And as early as possible, let's say they did have a stressful pregnancy. Let's say they did have forceps, vacuum, C-section. So they already have these warning signs, these red flags of trouble brewing with their child's nervous system. Now, if we look in the mouth, if we look at their sleep, if we look at their airway, what do you want parents looking for to know that they're going to need help in this department?
Good question. Like I said, what I see in the mouth, the signs in the mouth are like the tip of the iceberg. And everything that you talk about, and I've listened to hours of your podcast, you're doing a beautiful job, is the bottom of the iceberg. The problem is when body falls apart.
What do you mean by that? Tip of the iceberg is something you can see, and the neurological stuff is under the water? Okay.
Exactly. For example, the child's mouth is propped open and they never close their mouth. That was my melody. Her mouth was never closed. That's tip of the iceberg. But why is she not able to properly breathe through the nose? Because the route of breathing for body to function properly, for a healthy life, no matter what you do, no matter how good your diet is, no matter how much yoga and meditation you do, and how many adjustments a week you get, if you're not properly breathing through your nose, your body is not in a state of parasympathetic vagal tone, period, end of the story. That is not negotiable. Nasal breathing is linked on so many levels. You and I know in the Bible, Genesis chapter 2:7 says, God created man from dust of the ground and blew the breath of life into his nostril, and the man became a living soul. So we know the route of proper breathing that is cohesive, that is in fact congruent with our health and total health systems, the nose. Now, are we just supposed to be breathing through our nose? Like if you shut the mouth, is that enough? When I say proper, I mean proper. If you're closing your nose and closing your mouth and still sympathetically breathing with your chest through your nose, that's still not proper. You're still a sympathetic chest breather, except you're compensating with your neck to continue doing so. So one challenge I always have for the audience, well, I breathe through my nose just fine. Roll your shoulders back, put your head right on top of your spine, where it belongs, put your tongue completely at the roof of your mouth, and that's a good test. If you cannot get your tongue properly sealed to the roof of your mouth, that's one reason I am convinced you're not a nose breather.
Dr. Bahar, literally 100% of my perfect storm patients breathe from their neck. Literally, they're just stuck in their class, and you could just see it. And it doesn't matter their age, babies to teenagers to adults. It is literally visually, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right?
Look, a child's head is about half a foot in front of their spine.
Yeah.
They're using their accessory and neck muscles to continue, because somebody's going to move that rib cage. When
Yep.
we are born, we go from an amphibian to a human. We get air in our lung. Somebody continue moving. Something has to move that lung to create the pressure gradient for breathing. The pressure outside of us and pressure inside for that movement to happen. If diaphragm is not functioning to do it, then your rib cage is going to be moved by the neck. Neck breather is sympathetic breather. That puts them in the autonomic, dysautonomic state of function, which reduces the vagal tone, both structurally and physiologically. And now their gut and HPA axis become a secondary source of problem for both function, producing neurotransmitters they need for proper functioning, and for continued with the proper physiology of breathing. Meaning, children close their mouth and for 10 seconds, just like I explained, pull your shoulders back, put your tongue at the roof of your mouth and neck over here. Now see how long you can breathe through your nose that way. That's the first estimate. The second is, if you just hold your breath, just stop breathing through your nose and see how long it takes for you to have that urge to take the next breath. If you cannot hold your breath for at least 40 seconds without the urge, your body is not sensitive enough to the most important gas, CO2, which means you're a chronic mouth breather. You can't breathe through your nose properly because the mouth is the way you regulate those gases that you're not sensitive to retain physiologically.
That's why it's a vicious cycle. That's why you can take the perfect storm and you can use the perfect storm analogy 1,001 ways within this sphere of conversation, because subluxation and sympathetic dominance and dysfunctional breathing and autonomia, they become a vicious cycle where once your child has this and by the way, I know all the moms and dads listening right now are like, oh my goodness, I came to listen about my child's breathing and I breathe out of my neck and I breathe, so I get it. That's why we have a family practice and we adjust your kiddos and you to reset this and clear this out. But we do know that you have this entire concept of the nervous system getting so locked into these compensatory mechanisms that become a new normal. And I'm glad you said that earlier, because it's like, oh no, I can do that. I was actually just talking about this with patients this morning. It's exactly like motor milestones. Okay, your kiddo can walk, your kiddo can run, your kiddo can go, but we have to use a different set of glasses to grade out the efficiency or lack of the function or dysfunction within that. And sadly, the pediatrician, the dentist, and even like standard chiropractors or standard physical therapists or standard athletic trainers, fill in the blank, they miss what's right in front of them because there's subtleties to this that are massively important, right? And breathing, the other thing that is part of that vicious cycle is the number one thing that will put the nervous system into fight or flight, right? Full on sympathetic fight or flight, adrenal, HPA access, and throw everything off downstream is lack of oxygen. The brain is sensitive to proprioception, which is perception of movement, so posture and space and vestibular function. The brain is very sensitive to gut function. Everybody today wants to talk about the microbiome and the gut-brain connection. They're talking about something very important. But if we had to rank them, that's third. Function from breathing and function from proprioception. The brain is actually more tapped into gravity, so where we are in space, motor function and proprioception, and breathing and respiration. It is more tapped into those two things, and it needs those more than honestly even nutrition. And that's not to put nutrition and the microbiome and the gut-brain connection down. It's to put breathing and nervous system regulation up. And so if you have tried to fix your kid's gut, get their immune system, get them out of inflammation, get their, their sensory challenges to go away, get their primitive reflexes to clear out, you got to go to the brainstem. You got to go to the mouth. You got to go to the airway, because that's where the problem first probably started. And the other issues are compensatory downstream challenges. And so you start with pediatric chiropractic, you start with the mouth and the airway and breathing. And now you're going to see so much of this stuff that you've worked on so much and maybe got some gains, but not much. You'll be able to get entire improvement with gut function, immune function, everything else once you really get to the
growth hormone for children. And that's the nail in the head, because a lot of symptomatology is being chased. Even functional medicine doctors, when I talk to them, they're all chasing the physiological symptoms. And that's out of the three triangles, that's the one that gets addressed most.
I love you.
The analogy I use, Tony, is always like, allopathic system. I was a part of that allopathic system that amputated my daughter's immune cells, they basically look at destroyed wood floors. Okay. Functional medicines, they're really good at saying that there's a leak and there's water on the floor. Let's mop that. Great. That's a good function. But when I look at the sink overflowing, how big of a sink somebody has, that's their adaptive capacity. But when I see a sink overflowing and the sink has a kink and this faucet is dripping or faucet is full on running without shutting that and removing the drain, all you're doing is mopping. It does not matter what kind of supplements and peptides you have. It doesn't matter how much you're supporting the gut system and functions, how you're supporting the mitochondria, what you're doing for gut access. If they are still in sympathetic because their brain stem for breathing, which is the most important thing, is dysfunctional and their orthopedic is off, where do we go? Shut down the faucet, drain the sink, then mop the floors. To me, makes no sense to go after brain waves when we have a skull that is so distorted that one occiput is heavily sitting on top of that atlas because their entire face is also that way.
We are renaming this podcast the Experience Miracles Podcast with Dr. Bahar Esmaili. Everyone, I am officially stepping to the side because everything you are saying, but especially that you are preaching and teaching our language, because yes, they're still chasing symptoms or systems in that way. And it's such an exciting era to practice in, but it's exciting and frustrating at the same time because it's like you haven't unhitched from the medical philosophy, and just because you switch from medication to supplementation, right? And so that's really, really where we are. Okay, so signs, going back to that with their kiddo, right? What else are they looking for? What's above the surface? So what's above the iceberg that they can look into the mouth? They can look at breathing. I think they probably know, but let's just make sure we don't miss that. Like, what are the real things that you would say?
There's a misconception in a lot of people are starting to notice this more and not. Snoring child. Okay. There's nothing funny or cute about a child that snores. No. Nothing. If a child is noisy breathing, if you can hear them breathe, if you can see them swallow and you can hear them breathe, those are subtle signs that this child body is dysfunctional neurologically, structurally, and they cannot function. If you can hear them chew, because their mouth is never closed when they're chewing. And if they're not able to swallow properly, meaning that you have the child swallow and they're using their face to swallow, that's a primitive swallow. That's an infantile swallow. What we had before we had a proper tongue function, we use our facial nerve for swallowing milk out of the breast. And when we become motor, develop, sophisticated humans, the tongue needs to have its boundaries and go to the roof and do what it's supposed to do. And when the body is either neurologically behind or structurally unable to support it, tongue tie, which by the way, tongue tie is also a byproduct of all the things that is related to neurology.
It's more a symptom than a root cause, yeah.
Exactly. Mouth breathing is a symptom. Tongue tie is a symptom. And when the child cannot get their speech delay, they cannot pronounce words, and they go to speech pathologists and they say, they're delayed for speaking, which kind of ties into ADHD and autism to some degree.
Massively, yeah.
Massively related to, we have to look in this child's cranial structure. See, I have a skull back here.
Yeah.
Because that skull, it's a beautiful system. It is the center of what makes us human. There's a beautiful system that part of it is in the front, call it the storefront. Part of it is in the back, the warehouse. And in the middle of that is all that cartilage that helps the face grow in the right direction. And for that to happen, the tongue needs to be at the proper order for every swallow at all times at the roof of the mouth, allowing this nasal breathing and swallowing to move us in a forward direction. Okay. So anything that hinders that will cause this child to delay their process of development. They will end up with an underdeveloped face, underdeveloped jaws, and crooked teeth. Hence, bring on the drum roll, Tony. Crooked teeth are a result of dysfunctional system.
They're pretty far down the road, aren't they? They're, as far as like they're symptom number 7 or whatever at best, right? Okay.
By the time they have a crooked teeth, they're already gone down the road. So how do I look at an infant? Colicky child, right? Colicky baby. Are they able to properly put their tongue at the roof of their mouth? Is this child, and that parasympathetic button, that incisive papilla, that's a byproduct of distortion in the cranium. And when this child is unable to get themselves into the parasympathetic, what do? They thumb suck to bypass those distortions to get themselves to move the spinal fluid, to get their bodies into
trying to move the whole upper cervical cranial system. Same with when they get stuck on the pacifier through older years. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go. Okay. So parents, no, they can look at their kiddo's case history. Let's play this out. Parents, no, my pregnancy, that was me. This labor and delivery, that was definitely there. The early difficulty with latching and nursing and colic and constipation and reflux. And so whatever age this kiddo is, and we now have the airway, the sleeping, the snoring, the speech. What is the hierarchy? Because I want to say not just what is the solution, because it isn't singular, right? It isn't singular. It is definitely a plural answer as to what the solutions are. They're all going after one singular root cause of this neurological dysfunction, which then creates this sequelae of mechanical, structural, respiratory, all the above. So what is your hierarchy when a parent is starting this journey of getting their kiddo better? What's one, what's two, and take us to three. I also know there's more than three, right? If we were to really write the whole book and put it out there, but let's go top three. Where are you starting to fail?
So if your child, if you resonate with this, you're like, I have a 15-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, I have a newborn. The first thing we got to address is get that child breathing properly. So why are they not breathing properly? And let me explain this one point, because this is where you just really beautifully set the stage for me and tee it up. It's not one thing. Breathing is a function of a hollow space within our body. The hollow space needs to stay open when we're breathing out, because when we're breathing in and breathing out, that space needs to keep itself open. And there's a set of muscles that do that called airway muscles. And that happens to be the most pliable, the most movable part of our spine, which is cervical spine. You know this, you're a chiropractor. So basically, position of our cervical spine has a lot to do with the functionality of those airway muscles to stay open so we don't collapse. Because if that happens, it doesn't matter what's for lunch. If our airway cannot stay open, we're done, right? Everybody knows that. What makes that airway to stay open is the negative pressure from inside, which has a lot to do with how our diaphragm functions, which has a lot to do with how our mouth functions, and how our neck is communicating the two of them. The most important juncture in our entire body is our neck. You attest to that. You're welcome, Tony. You guys are awesome.
The transition zones are the most important structures, period. And you can actually rank the transition zones in priority, and the neck is first. Yep.
Huge, especially the most important part of that is the juncture between the skull and the spine, atlanto-occipital joint. Why is that super important? Because half of that structure is controlled from the mouth, and the other half is controlled by this atlas and axis, first and second vertebra, and how these two orient themselves for all of our sensory information to work. Eyes, ears, vestibular system, mouth, teeth, to help us gaze our eyes with the horizon, walk without our head falling forward, and continue to breathe. We are swallowing every few seconds to tell the brain how all of this sensory information come together so we can propel our head to the space. So when there's any sort of dysfunction between them, if a child, again, rounded shoulder, if you want to know if your child's got a problem, take a look at their posture, take a look at their feet, flat feet, their posture being all forward, their mouth, their face growing long, ears flaring out. Those are all subtle signs. And to me, they're not subtle. It's almost like a nail out of their forehead. That child is dysfunctionally breathing. Now, what do I do for that kid? Well, before age 7, there's a lot more that I can do before age 2. But if your child is, let's say, 7 years old, they're already getting their teeth replaced, the baby teeth are leaving, and the permanent teeth are coming in. The appliances therapies that now we can actually prescribe to these children, they're super easy to wear. It allows their mouth, through proper function, to grow instead of wait till they're done growing and we have to take teeth out of their mouth to accommodate their teeth to their smaller arch. Training the tongue during that time is super important. But before even I engage with that, Tony, I always have my parents or patients directed to the right chiropractor. And my favorite ones are SOT. Why? Yep. Because without a proper spine orientation and pelvis orientation, it's impossible to organize those 22 bones and allow the tongue to be tongue when there's no pelvis functioning of the diaphragm. So that's the first thing I address. And it's honestly, the way I see it is, we're thinking it takes too long to go and see all this as specialist. You know what takes too long? Doing it the wrong order. I've been at it since 2017 trying to treat my daughter. And I just learned about primitive reflex retention, not just, but a year ago. And I'm trying to see, The whole time I'm trying to fix her posture, she's retaining primitive reflexes, to be exact, symmetric tonic reflex. That's why her vestibular system has been off and she's been led with a crossbite. And I fixed
what we really need to do is get her evaluated by a PX doctor and find out if she has a subluxation, an asymmetrical subluxation in her TL junction, which is another very essential transition zone, and that could be locking in sympathetic dominance and leading to that. The CT, so upper cervical suboccipital is the most important. ATNR retention comes from a CT junction, so it'll be at that cervical thoracic junction, and then something like a spinal galant or others, if there's subluxation still at the TL junction, then that remains as well. So, and that's one of the places where SOT chiropractic is so amazing, because it's really, really, really got a standard of expertise at the very, very top. And you can almost kind of say at the very bottom, right? Because SOT, by the way, stands for sacral. So that'd be the bottom, occipital, the top. And of course they adjust and everything in between. What we've really done with our neurotonal approach is we're cranial, we're upper cervical, we're sacral obsessed. But what we have found is these transition zones are the most over, and we haven't even talked about this, Dr. Bahar. So I'm sending this to you first time too. But these transitional zones, not just upper cervical, but the CT junction, the thoracolumbar junction, and then the lumbopelvic junction in addition with gait and distortion. But these two transition zones in the middle, even chiropractically, sometimes we miss what is hidden in plain sight. Back to our very original analogy that kicked off this podcast, these subluxation patterns exist at these transition zones from the cervicals to the thoracics and the thoracics to the lumbars. And what they do is they set in ATNR. They'll set in spinal galant. They'll set in respiratory breathing through the shoulders. They'll set in lymphatic and sinus congestion. They'll set in adrenal dominance and excessiveness. They'll set in constipation and issues with motility and detoxification. And so a lot of chiropractic techniques, because we've been chasing, awesomely so, rightfully so, these parasympathetic hotbed centers within the upper cervical and the mouth and the cranium, because the vagus nerve. And then the sacrum has a plexus of parasympathetic nerves. We've known that we're taking care of a population of kids and patients who are sympathetic dominant. So what we did, which was very, very right, but just incomplete, is we focused all of our adjustments at the top and the bottom to try and get this parasympathetic surge, which is exactly what happens. Exactly. But the middle is a mess as well. And so my story within this very, very granular frame of the right kind of adjustments, because you got to get chiropractic, you got to get the right, complete kind of chiropractic for our kiddos, is I was taught to avoid those areas because, the sympathetic nervous system is in there. And so what would happen, Bahar, is I would get a bunch of my kiddos within the first 60 to 90 days. They would start to make neurological progress. They'd start to sleep better. They'd start to breathe better. They'd start to digest better. Their sensory system, their motor patterns, their behavior, things were absolutely positively moving in the right direction. And then we'd plateau. We would plateau. And what I was told was, that means you need to fix their lifestyle, or it's maybe nutritional, or it's maybe, so then that's where I got caught up in functional medicine, right? And now I started to chase these plateaus with supplements and yada, yada, right? And all's it was, that's kind of oversimplifying it, was these subluxations still stuck in these thoracic transitional regions. And I'll leave you with this, because this is everything. And this is why I want to even be the one to run the scans on your daughter and check it and see what Miss Melody has there and see if there's a final layer of this that we could help her with, because respiration. So respiration has to make its way in this very sequential, symmetrical, efficient. And so these transition zones are where the breath and oxygenation will literally get locked in, even with the upper cervical perfect, even with myofunctional work.
You beautifully set the stage for me, because one of those transitional zones is my area, the temporomandibular joint. And that hinge, basically what brings our higher bone, tongue, mandible into closure. And now as bipedal species, we have 2 feet on the ground and the other 2 sets of contacts, which is our mouth comes to close. Now everything that is subluxed is stuck between those 2 data points. What do we get? Short-circuited child.
Nailed it.
Every time they swallow, their brain is getting all kinds of misinformation. Now, what do we do with that child? First of all, before age 12, we can do a lot with their body to help that mouth properly grow. But you do need to have a dentist who's well-trained in understanding airway development and how to get that mouth and that tongue to function for that child. Because no matter how many times, and I tell you, I see this all the time, chiropractors are doing an amazing job with the child or an adult. But the fact is, it only is a matter of time before the way they're supporting their skull from their mandible position, that's going to sublux everything back to all the way descend them to the toes, go back to where they started.
So you're stuck point. That could be a source of plateau as well. You're saying,
exactly,
right? Yeah,
100%. Especially with certain cranial distortions that would lead to, if you're familiar with the SOT, the majority of the cases we see they're at a category 2 or going to be category 2, which results into temporal bones, which are the hip bones in our head, to be out of distortion, either one side or both of them, and that guides the mandible into an improper position, inducing what we know to be the class 2 malocclusion, which is the most common reasons for why parents seeking orthodontics for their children, because their jaw is backwards. That's class 2. The chin is back. And for a lot of folks, that's more of a it calls a lot of, self-awareness, because, lower small jaw does not produce appearance of a beautiful face. And I wanted to write this book with this title, Tony, that said, beautiful faces, why are we attending to them? Beautiful faces function, because a beautiful face is a byproduct of a nervous system that was allowing the cranial structures properly, functionally, neurologically order that face into existence. And beautiful smile is a dial to that nervous system. So by creating an illusion of straight teeth, we're basically taking away from the fact that nervous system can create that. Orthodontists create that. Dentists create that. A system that was responsible for the crooked malaligned tooth is still malaligned. Now, to some degree, if they can adapt out of it because they have the capacity, they don't have symptomatology, or they just spending their reservoirs, basically.
Yeah, it is. It's similar to what you're talking about before with functional. Yeah. So I've never asked you this yet either. Can someone still benefit from Vivos product and care post all the orthodontic? Let's say they're all the way on the other side. Okay, right? Because you got to imagine the actual problem is still there.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Actually, our treatment appliances, and here's what I'm so excited to share with your audience is, Vivos is the only company that has ever patented and has attained FDA clearance for treatment of all breathing disorders, including the most severe case, which becomes obstructive sleep apnea, anywhere from mild to severe for both adult and children. And we just got this clearance not too long ago, which was groundbreaking, because my daughter did not have any chance to.
Neither did my kids. I knew what I didn't want to do. I literally, with my kids, with their mouth, I literally lived your life. I knew what I didn't want to do, but I also didn't know what else to do. You know what I mean?
Like, what do you do? Because get the tonsils out? The oral appliance was not even an option. Even New England Journal, I talked to one of the top ENTs who referenced that to me, and I said, but did you ever ask the question that how they're breathing and how mouth can affect that? No, we don't. Matter of fact, some ENTs believe that it's okay to breathe through the mouth. It's just another way of breathing.
And it gets tricky too. It can actually get tricky with kids. So this is a whole even more granular, but sometimes kids who are so well adjusted, healthy kids sometimes, like when you, and this is a lot of our audience, you guys are rock stars. You live this crazy, healthy, natural life. You're getting adjusted. Sometimes it's harder to find the issue in a healthy child because it doesn't have the same flashing red lights. So like for our kiddos with dentistry and with, like, it's always been a cosmetic desire more so than a, we've thankfully I've been blessed to know how to check all these functions we've talked about here on this one forever. And we've been blessed. 4 for 4 are good. Even Oliver, who had a very traumatic, birth and brainstem pressure and everything else, like breathing and everything has always been good on that end. But then there's even cases where it's like, oh, well, cosmetically, the dentist, the orthodontist, they'll be like, oh, we could do this. And then you're like, wait a minute. But if you unhinge that, then you unhinge that, and then you unhinge that, you're like,
I'll tell you what, even if cosmetic is your thing, a lot of patients that I treat them with Vivos appliances, adults, and I've treated them all the way to 85 years old, the cranial sutures are not closed. We still manipulate them because mouth is a very, very profound, robust surface for the neurosensory information and stem cells. Our appliances beautifully help the body unwind itself from mouth backwards with the help of a professional like yourself, like all the chiropractors I work with, so we can put the body back in order.
Yep.
Because the mouth is no longer messing them up. And we've treated hundreds and hundreds of patients successfully, treat their apnea to completion, get them off the CPAP. I've personally seen that happen so many times because we care about the way they breathe. I don't want them to be on those machines and plastics for the rest of their life. God didn't design us that way. Is there
a process to this? Meaning, like, is there devices that are involved in the early stages that have to do with correction and restoration, and then there's stabilization later on?
Yes, we have appliances for all ages, from anywhere from 2 years old, as soon as they can get the appliance in their mouth. When they have teeth, we treat them all the way to 85. And no matter where in that category falling, we have an appliance for them. We do train their tongue and airway functionality. And we're collaborating with a lot of chiropractors like yourself, physical therapists, other modalities to help the mouth function for that patient. So the process of appliance is usually about 12 months of wearing the appliance. It's removable. We don't do palate expansions like most other treatments out there. There's no surgery involved. Non-pharmaceutical, non-surgical. How you like that?
Oh, it's right. It's a digital. I've wanted to hug you about 47 times during this class, but so what's the first step? How do they get access?
First step is we got to find out why their body is distorted and who needs to help them. So we take very sophisticated information from patients, from CT scan of their entire skull and airway and evaluation of their face and mouth. Beautiful. And we do sleep tests on them, which, by the way, remember I told you about how my daughter got diagnosed? Go to a lab, $5,000 sleep lab. Now we ask a simple test as much as a ring on their finger with an app on their phone, and that's it. We have beautiful system to diagnose.
So you're testing HRV.
Yes.
Hug number 48. Okay. All right. Goodness. Yeah.
Good news for your audience, because diagnosis is the most important thing, Tony.
Okay.
And we can't, one of the reasons why children are being shoved at home until they're 8 years old is because the diagnostic step was really, really cumbersome. But now we can diagnose them in their own bed. The cheapest way for a couple of hundred.
The accuracy of that, I've worked in the seizure world forever, and there's nothing more useless to me than an in-hospital EEG sleep study. What do we expect?
Go to bed.
What do you think? The leads are bad enough. An ambulatory at home, it's still not real life because they have all the leads and everything hooked up, but at least it has a chance because they're in their environment. It really does matter that you do the testing in as regular, normal state as you could be. Okay.
Yes, we do test them at their own home for multiple nights, which is way more important because we have a full picture of that child's breathing and we appropriate their treatment for what they need, addressing their tongue, addressing their mouth and their body and their neck and their spine and their tailbone and digestion. So like my daughter, she still needs support with, because all this dysbiosis now has made her a good host for a whole host of bacteria, SIBO, more about that than I do. And addressing that dysbiosis, sometimes you also do need a nutrition and detox, but not till they got their nervous system orthopedically in check. We gotta address that.
We should try and do a podcast-a-thon where we just talk about the nervous system for 24 hours and see what you and I are capable of. But speaking of miracle kiddos like your Melody and my Oliver, there is, the kiddo who was supposed to have brain damage and seizures and have severe breathing. Every other kiddo who started life with him, PPHN and all the cardiopulmonary issues that I know of is full of respiration and neurological challenges. And he's winning cross-country meets and playing basketball. So I do have a basketball game for my beautiful Miracle Man to get to, but this will not be the last time the PX Docs and the Experience Miracles audience and community hears from you, Dr. Bahar. You guys at Vivos and PX Docs, we will be working together because I always go, and I want to say it one more time. I taught this about 15 minutes ago, but I want to say it for clarity. The number one place we need to go to get our kids better is their nervous system. And their nervous system, one of the surest signs of nervous system dysfunction is respiration, breathing dysfunction. They are literally tethered together. And so whenever I have a chiropractic patient and a kiddo who's making progress and going forward and we're getting great healing, but we can't get to the most important phase, which we call stability, where their nervous system, because life is still stressful. You can't put them in a bubble. They're still going to grow. They're still going to get sick. So we not only have to get them back to baseline, we need to give them slack. So neurological stability is such, and I've done a podcast about this. If you're just tuning in to this, you can go back a couple of podcasts and talk about the one where I talk about the 3 phases of healing. This third phase of stability is absolutely everything. It's the patency phase, right? It's where there's slack in the system. And I find again and again, when we get a kiddo and we can't quite cross the bridge into final full healing, it's the mouth, it's the airway, it's not the gut. Everybody thinks it's the gut, and it's not. It's respiration, and we need to get a device in. We need to get the right dental team, the right airway team to support and hold things. That's simplifying it. There's more to it than that, as you taught, but like, we need to be able to hand the baton to you guys and say, hey, now 1 + 1 = 11. So I'm beyond
excited. It's a beautiful dance between professionals.
Yep.
And I tell you what, Tony, breath is the currency of nervous system, and posture is how the body manifests it. Like, the way you posture yourself is all to show you how the breathing and respiration is happening at any given second. Even heart rate variability is all showing how the body is breathing and respiring. And this is amazing. You're absolutely right. I think the audience would probably get warmed up and want to hear more about what I do. And our treatments are basically fix it, leave it, and let your body sustain itself. I don't want them in plastic for the rest of their life. I don't want a scalpel used on anyone as much as possible. Thank you so much again, Dr. Tony. This was amazing. I love talking to you, and I learn something every time we talk.
Yep. I love, and behind you there, be still and know that I am good. And the one that, I have a bunch, but the one that's in our house is just, hey, to whom much is given, much is expected. And that's the job we now have, is to not only put our 2 professions together, but especially our roles are to represent the professions, do the training, and then get the message out to the community. So many of you families who are already seeing some incredible gains, already have your kiddos getting adjusted. And if you feel like, and we've had tons of requests for this episode to bring in an airway expert and a nervous system expert. And there was only, literally, I mean this, there's only one, and I've met a ton. There was only one I was bringing on, Bahar, and it's you. Anytime this conversation comes into our world, it's you that's going to lead the way. And I can't wait to
I appreciate you, Tony. And my goal is, I know I missed a window with my melody, but there are melodies that are being born, Olivers that are being born right as you and I are recording this. We want to get to them. We want a better world when everyone has a chance to breathe.
We're going to do it too.
Intended it to be.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you. We love you. Remember, please share the heck out of this show. You guys are our community is amazing. You're subscribing, you're leaving reviews. If you could leave a review, that helps a ton to help get the word out with all that sort of stuff. But the most effective thing you could do to help us save another melody and reach another Oliver is to just send that text out. Take this episode and put it in your mom group chat. I know you have group chats. I know you have Facebook groups. I know you are all over out there, moms, because Bahar and I were and are. And so send this episode especially far and wide. God bless you. We love you. Bahar, have a wonderful day. See you, buddy.